Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much for inviting me at Creative Mornings or Creative Midnights, because I think for most creatives this is midnight. Real creative wakes up at 11, right? And thank you very much for inviting me to talk about such a light-hearted topic as freedom. So, what is freedom? When I think about freedom, the first thing that comes to my mind is really people like Ai Weiwei, who suffer for freedom, who want to create beautiful stuff or create art and go to jail for those things. I think about Basil, who wants to share his software, is 3 years in jail already just for creating software. I think right here where we live in the Netherlands, we tend to forget how important freedom is because we have it. These are people who really, really suffer. I think about these people. Maybe you've seen this video of the people happy in Tehran, dancing in the streets of Tehran, and they got arrested and they had to apologize on TV, national television in Iran. This person for me is pure evil. This is the man who tells them they have to apologize for being happy. Isn't that insane? This is what I think about, what first comes to mind when I think about freedom. I also think about, let's say this, my mother is from Greece, and these are the dictators, end 60s, begin 70s. And when they got into power, they took over all the radio stations. The only music they played was march music, you know, soldiers, they liked that. And every now and then they held a speech which always started with, "We decide and we order." Imagine living in such a country. Sorry. Where even freedom of thought was not allowed. So they skipped freedom of thought. Can you imagine that? That you're not even allowed to imagine that freedom of thought is not allowed. I think that's crazy. That's insane. But I will not bore you with these terrible subjects, because there's much more to freedom than terrible things, right? Freedom is also freedom to create, to make beautiful stuff. And I'm going to show you creating beautiful stuff and nice stuff for the web. How the web enables us to make beautiful things. Because the web it gives us a few forms of freedom that are unique, that we didn't have back in the 60s, where it was very difficult to share knowledge or to share insights or to share things that were illegal. And right now that's pretty easy. We have the web. So the web is beautiful. And it's actually pretty easy to create stuff for the web. And I'll illustrate this to you by, it won't be depressing anymore. You can smile again. I'm really sorry about that introduction. It was terrible. So I'll illustrate you how easy it is to create stuff for the web by showing you how hard it is to create stuff in real life. So, I read this book about mobile web design, beautiful book, and in it there were these beautiful illustrations by Mike Gus. I particularly like this one, which illustrates responsive web design. And in our house we had a very ugly, depressing wall, so I decided to paint this illustration onto our wall. This is a lot of work, but I did it, looked like this, and you're all creatives, so you immediately spot the problem here. The white space over here is not big enough. So I created this whole thing. This was a lot of work, and then after it was done, I'm not really that creative, so I spotted it after the fact. So, how you make this thing is you make, you see it should be like this. It was like this, it should be like this. So what I had to do was, I had this stencil, created it in Illustrator. I'm very bad at Illustrator, so I had to reopen Illustrator, make the stencil a little bit smaller, send it to the laser cutter again to cut the stencils for me. Then ask my daughter if she would please get off my car so I could drive to the laser cutter, get the stencils, and then paint every single ball back onto the wall. Now this is a lot of work. This is really a lot of work. It took me about a month to get this done. Now on the web, this is very, very easy. I'll show you. So let's say I have this illustration of what's happening here? This illustration of balls. And imagine I created this with web technology and I'd say, no, this is too big. As you can see, the only thing I'd have to do if I created it correctly is make the font size a little bit smaller and the whole illustration is smaller. That's how easy it is to create stuff for the web. So painting the illustration onto the wall took me about a month. Creating this thing took me about one evening, something like that. And I can adjust it whenever I want to. Creating stuff for the web, my friends, is very, very easy and very liberating. Now, I used to work for a very big company. And the thing we did there was, or everything we did there made sense. Or at least we thought it made sense, or our clients thought it made sense. So our clients paid us a lot of money to make them stuff that made them more money, probably something like that. Everything we did made sense. So I wanted to create nonsense. I wanted to think about nonsense. I wanted to write about nonsense. So I created a weblog in which I wrote about nonsense, like this beautiful thing. Do you know this one? Defiant Dog. It's a wonderful website. You see this picture of a dog and a button, a real HTML button where you could click on, which says sit. And what would happen if you click on that button? I think everybody in this audience would click on this button, right? So I asked the creator, do people click on the button, because he's counting that. And yes, everybody clicks about 30 times on that button. And nothing happens, nothing at all. So I wrote about this beautiful thing. I wrote about this insane project by the people of Eend, the Vasilis, which has QR codes of beautiful works of art, which is just disgusting, isn't it? So I wrote that, I created this weblog, and as you can see, this is also very functional. I mean, it's all text. And I decided to make it a bit more nonsensical to add this little illustration next to every article. Now I'm going to show you how you create such an illustration with web technology, and I'm going to show you what happens when you close the gap between designers and geeks. So we have here an HTML document with geeks with 4 lasers who want to fight designers. They have 4 lasers and they want to fight and destroy geeks, right? You don't get it? It'll be clear in a few moments. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is, so I'm just going to do some live coding here. We'll get rid of the lasers for now, we'll get back to them later. Put the geeks and the designers in one corner so they can fight each other. And now, the whole trick here, that illustration that you saw before, that's a font, and it's a beautiful font. It used to be open source. I think the designer got rid of it, he put it offline, that's a pity. But by just including here that font family Bagaros, we create these wonderful geeks versus designers. I love this about the web, that people create this stuff, put it online, and I especially love it when they do it with an open license, so we can use it and play with it and create silly things like this. Or we can put designers and geeks opposite to each other. Now, we wanted lasers, right? So I'll add some lasers. Here are the lasers, one laser coming out of the eye, but now we want them, of course, to be interactive. Or maybe first this step, now we want them interactive. So here, designers and geeks are trying to shoot each other, which of course never happens, because stupid designers, you want rounded corners. You cannot do rounded corners with your stupid browsers. But, I mean, we're immune, right? We don't listen to each other. So the solution here, of course, to this problem is not putting geeks and designers this far away from each other. The solution here is to make the screen smaller. And when they get this was supposed to animate. Okay, the animation is gone. Beautiful, right? So this is the wise lesson that we can learn from the freedom to create wonderful stuff online. So now, this is all wonderful nonsense. So by writing about this, I started thinking of creating stuff daily. I mean, this is an old. People have been creating stuff on a daily basis for forever. I mean, Onkawara is a wonderful example of a person who painted the day painting every single day. This is a unique one where he painted 2 paintings. And this is really painted by hand, right? This is not printed, this is not generated by Google or something. No. And he made all this crazy stuff where every day he had a map of the city he was in, and he would just draw the lines of where he went that day. That's something that Google does for us, for everybody of us right now, right? You have to do that by hand. Google is creating art for us. There's also this one, the beautiful example of the Daily Drop Cap by Jessica Heish, you might know it. She created 1 letter every single day for, I think, 2 years or something like that, really long period of time. Beautiful, beautiful work, and a lot of work if you look at these things. I think this is a bit of a waste of time, right? I mean, we have computers nowadays. We can generate stuff every day. So I created this, for instance. A few years ago, I created 1 nothing a day, which generates nothing every single day. That's been going on for 782 days now. So every day, nothing is generated in a different color and a different font. You can follow it on Twitter if you want to. Now, I was discussing this with a friend of mine. Maybe you know the weblog Minimalissimo, the designer of that, the mastermind behind that weblog. He said that this is not nothing, right? What I see here is a word. You don't generate nothing here. So we sat together, and what we came up with and what we created was this beautiful page. If you look at the scroll bar on the right, you see that it's a very long page. It's been going on for 150 days now, And every single day, nothing is generated on this page. So it gets longer every day. And if I select everything, I'll have to show this in another browser, I'm afraid. Now, if you select this, you'll see that these are all white images of different sizes. That's what I do nowadays that I don't work anymore. So, if you want to follow this wonderful project, you can follow it on Twitter too. There's a new tweet. So this morning, nothing was generated. And you can click on it. You can always also follow it on Flickr. I think this is the most beautiful Flickr. Isn't it wonderful? So I create this stuff and I just share it everywhere, and nobody ever sees it. So what this thing taught me was how do I generate stuff of random sizes, and I like that. So, but what this thing does is it generates white, only white. And the problem with myself, the problem that I have as a creative is I don't understand color. So I don't understand which colors fit together, what is beautiful. I just don't know, I just don't get it. So I decided instead of finding out or reading about it or learning about it, I'll just generate color. So this is another project which came after that. It's a daily rectangle. So every single day, a rectangle is generated of a different size, a different color, on a different background color. Of course, this too, you can follow on Flickr, and you can follow it on Twitter. I think, yes, there's a new one. That's a nice one. This was generated this month. You see, I still don't get color. And this made me investigate a few of the new techniques you can use on the web. For instance, I wanted this page, I wanted every image to always be as high as the viewport. So 100%. You couldn't do this before with CSS, and now you can. As a new unit, the VH unit, you can use it to make it as high as the viewport. So you can enjoy one whole rectangle and look at it if you want to. I went on, created the daily blob, for instance, which generates a blob every day. Now, this is, of course, not very useful, right? It's all nonsensical, but I got some things out of there. For instance, I read this article about ratios, about the most perfect ratios, what is excellent orthogons, about classic ratios in graphic design. And it was a very abstract article, and I just wanted to visualize it. So what does this look like? What do these ratios look like? So instead of opening up Photoshop and creating every single possible ratio by hand, I just opened up my text editor and I generated every single possible ratio by hand. Not by hand, by computer. I mean, developers should be lazy, right? We should have the freedom to do nothing and let the computers do stuff for us. So here we have these ratios, and it also teaches me something about color. And I used this actually to redesign my site. So now I have, because I could visualize what this looks like, and I could use the whole screen, I could now use it to visualize my whole site. There's one thing that you might have noticed on every color generated page. Here in the right bottom, it describes what you're seeing. And I think that's one of the most important things of the web. because the web is for everybody. It was really intended to be for everybody. It was invented to be used on whatever hardware, whatever software you had. It doesn't matter. You should be able to use it. I think that's the most wonderful thing about the web. So what I did is I created a script which describes the colors and the shapes that you see on the web. There's another beautiful thing on the web. I put this script on GitHub, I wrote it in PHP. Half an hour later somebody said, I ported it to JavaScript. And half an hour later somebody ported it to Python. That's amazing, right? Creating something and then it gets better. They got some errors out there too, so that's amazing too. So what I did here is I thought, what if you lose your eyes, right? And you remember color. Now you can read about this color and just imagine this color, and you can imagine what it looks like. That's nice. Imagination is always good. And so, for example, the balls that we looked at earlier, they work on a big screen. Now, should that same illustration look the same on a smaller screen, or could we do things like this? Right? We can take the freedom to adjust the illustration for smaller screens. I get in an endless loop when I create stuff like this. Sorry about that.
How am I doing?
Yeah. So, or what should it look like when you, so I created this with CSS rounded corners, and a few years ago we couldn't do that, and there are still browsers in use that don't show rounded corners. Now what should this illustration look like when you don't have border radius in your browser? Should it look like this? I don't think so. This doesn't really look like the original illustration, which was about balls, right? This is about squares. It's something else. It looks nice, but it's totally different. I think a better solution would be, in this case, to make it look like this. Balls, two connected balls, a blue ball, a red ball, two connected balls, a white ball, and then leave it up to the imagination of the visitor. And maybe if you're really creative, you'll come up with something even more beautiful than the original illustration. You probably will. And I think in Internet Explorer, the old one, I used a modern way of showing color, or modern, something that doesn't work in old Internet Explorer. And I think they're lucky in this case because they can even imagine the color. Right? I mean, that's really, really beautiful. But by creating this illustration in this way, not even people with Internet Explorer, but even unluckier people, for instance, blind people, can enjoy this, so they can...
Balls. Two connected balls.
They can listen to
a blue ball. A blue ball. A red ball. Two connected balls.
And then they can imagine what that should look like. Thank you very much for your time.